everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. Now, my talk is called Teaching the Room, and the phrase is simple, but it captures a serious point. The classroom is not just a place where learning happens, space actively usually shapes learning. So, the project started from my teaching practice. I noticed something that I think many teachers recognize. You can teach the same lesson with the same students and still get very different classroom energy depending on the seating. Suddenly, the room feels open or closed, lively or flat, safe or tense, depending on the situation sometimes and the seating itself. Now, the obvious question is which seating arrangement is best? But my experience told me that the question is too narrow. It assumes seating has one predictable effect, when in reality, students respond differently. So I began asking a different question. What is happening inside students when we change the room? But if we can understand that, we can actually make seating decisions more thoughtfully, not as routines, but as pedagogy. Okay, right. So here is what this talk is about, and it will explore first classroom space as experience. When I say experience, I mean more than comfort. I mean, do students feel visible? Do they feel safe, judged, or supported? Second, students' voices and participation. Here, participation is not just a behavior. In the language learning, participation is closely tied to identity, confidence, and willingness to take tasks. If students don't speak, their learning opportunities can become limited. Um, Even if they are actually listening and thinking in the classroom. Third, rethinking seating beyond effectiveness. So a lot of classroom management research looks for measurable outcomes like scores, attention, on-task behavior. These are useful, but they can miss what teachers often notice first, which is emotion. So this project takes on qualitative approach to explore how seating shapes conditions for learning, especially through emotion and participation. Now, probably everybody here is familiar with seating arrangements such as rows, clusters, semicircles, circles, and so on. It's probably they influence student behavior, they influence engagement and interaction. And when it comes to grouping arrangements, students can be grouped according to ability, interest, random selection, and so on. And each of these strategies has its own benefits and demerits. Now, in education, we often use the word design when talking about tasks or materials, but we don't always apply it to physical space. However, seating is usually a design choice that shapes the social structure of the room. For example, who can easily talk to who can avoid interaction, who feels watched, who can hide. Grouping decisions also create social meaning. Random grouping can feel fair, but it can also feel unsafe for some students. So self-selected grouping can feel comfortable, but it can also reinforce cliques. So this framing position seating and grouping as part of the learning environment, not as a neutral background. It helps us probably argue that classroom management is not separate from learning. It's part of the learning ecology. So seating does not work alone, right? So seating and grouping interact with the tasks, with the student relationships, student confidence, teacher movement in the classroom, and classroom norms that you set from the beginning when you meet the students. So for example, a circle can be wonderful for discussion, but stressful for performance. Clusters can encourage peer support, but it can also create opportunities for one student to dominate while another disappear. So instead of treating seating as a simple variable like rows versus clusters, so this study treats seating as a social arrangement that shapes interaction patterns. So this is also why qualitative approach makes sense. So these interaction patterns are hard to capture, through simple measures. So you need observation, student voice, reflection probably to understand what is happening. It's actually limiting I can't move. I can't move to the other. Sorry, some technical issue. I can't move to the next slide. Oh, okay. Right. So rows are often associated with control and focus. Many teachers use rows when they want attention and calm in the classroom. So in this study, students described rows in two main ways. So first, rows can feel safe. If a student is shy or anxious, rows allow them to focus without pressure to perform socially. Second, rows can hide silence. A student can be physically present but socially absent, and it's harder to support, less scary than whole class speaking. But clusters also created uneven participation. So some students became quiet followers, others became leaders. So clusters can create learning opportunities, but they can also create social pressure because everyone is close and watching. Academically, this links to the idea that classroom interaction is not only linguistic, it's also social and emotional. The clusters produce richer interaction for many students, but they also make it harder to hide, which can be good for stressful, or it can be good or stressful. Actually, it depends on the learner itself. Right. Again. Now, when it comes to circles, circles are often used to represent equality. So everyone can see everyone, and students describe them usually in a divided way. So some felt the circles are more serious and meaningful. It felt like a real academic conversation. Others felt exposed, and the circle removes this physical protection since there is no back row. So if a student is anxious, the circle can feel like a spotlight. So this is important because it shows that inclusive design is not always experienced as inclusive by the students. So a design that looks equal can still produce inequality in emotional experience.
Around these survey data, we started by looking at data and what it said. We highlighted, we identified, and prioritized.
Please,
Each individually wanted to focus on.
for the audience, could you please unmute yourself? Thank you. Sorry about that, Vivian. Go ahead.
We implemented over the course of the semester.
Are powerful, but they require careful scaffolding and sensitive. For others, it feels exhausting, probably. They want stability and time to think. So speed dating illustrates an important point. Participation is not only about willingness, it's also about cognitive load and processing time. So faster interaction can help fluency or for some learners, but can overload others. So this supports the idea that classroom design creates different affordness for different students. Now, vignettes are useful in this research because they let us probably keep the complexity of the classroom life. So instead of turning experience into numbers and categories, vignettes helps us show how students experience learning in real situations. For those who are unfamiliar with them, so vignettes are short, focused stories that capture the texture of the classroom life, like actions of the students, feelings, small interactions. Instead of claiming that clusters, for example, increase participation, and vignette let us show how and for whom participation changes and what that means emotionally. So this is important because it creates evidence that is not numerical, but still rigorous. So it's grounded in observation, student voice, and social or careful interpretation. Now, you might ask yourselves, is this just a teacher opinion? The answer is no. The insights are from classroom observations and field notes, what I saw and heard, student reflections and interviews, what the students said and wrote, and the student reflexive journal, which I have used to interpret it and adjust my practice in my classroom. So to strengthen credibility, I used multiple data sources, ensured consistency across all those sources, and transparency about the interpretation. So the evidence here is not statistics, it's converging perspectives of all participants. Now, let me tell you the Rose story. One student described Rose as a safe corner. He liked sitting in a place where he didn't feel watched. He could focus without actually feeling wrong about that. So this mattered because it challenges a simple assumption that silence does not always mean disengagement. He admitted that he rarely spoke, right? So, and not because he didn't care to speak, but because it actually gave him a chance to feel safe without the attention, the unnecessary attention of the other classmates. However, it also creates teaching dilemma. If learning becomes invisible, teachers may not notice actually the student needs or misunderstandings. So this vignette supports my model that the arrangement creates feeling of safety, and that feeling shapes participation, and participation in the end shapes how learning is experienced. Now, when it comes to small clusters, I saw a different pattern actually. So one student described clusters as caring. She said that she could ask a friend quietly, and she made English, the setting made English feel less scary for her. In other words, like peer pressure reduced anxiety and supported risk-taking for them. But another student in the same group barely spoke. She smiled, she nodded, and she stayed on the edge of the discussion. So in this situation, probably teachers would assume that group work automatically increase participation. But this vignette shows that group work can also create quiet exclusion, especially if social dynamics are uneven among the students in the cluster. So clusters are not automatically inclusive. They require teacher attention, like checking if rotating roles is necessary in a certain situation, by giving quieter students probably entry points and so on. Now, the circle vignette shows the strongest contrast, actually. So one student enjoyed the circle. She felt that the room was serious and wanted to contribute. The circle gave her a sense of purpose and academic identity. Another student experienced the circle as exposure. He felt watched and feared being actually wrong or probably committing some errors. So one arrangement, probably this arrangement produced two opposite emotional experiences. This is exactly why I resist the best seating language. So academically, the circle shows that how students participate is usually connected to how they feel. Visibility can increase voice for some, but it can also increase anxiety for others. Now, in speed dating, the classroom energy changes immediately. One student enjoyed it because making mistakes or their mistakes, when they make them, felt small since they can just move on quite fast. If she said something awkward, she probably would forget about it in the next seating arrangement. So that reduced fear and made her talk more. Another student found it tiring and superficial. He wanted time to build ideas and connect with their partner, but the format prevented actually that. So after looking across the stories, a pattern became very clear. So seating affects emotional experience first. And the emotional experience shapes participation. And participation then actually shapes how learning is felt and remembered by the students. So this is not a claim that seating causes learning outcome. It's a claim that seating shapes learning conditions. So the process framing explains how things happen, not just whether they happen. So this model is a simple way to think about seating decisions as choices that influence emotions and interactions between the students and with the teacher as well. So it's useful because it gives teachers a language to reflect. So for example, how might this seating make students feel? Who might speak more? Or what might learning feel like today in the class? So this model is simple, but it helps us notice things that we often take for granted in our classrooms. So the key message here is not to avoid certain seating arrangement. It's to stay aware of how students experience them. So no seating works actually for everyone. So this is very important concept. Different students actually need different kinds of safety and support in each type of seating. So teaching the room means designing interaction with emotional awareness, listening to students and their needs, and adjusting as we learn more about them by paying attention to their emotions, not only just the activities that we are creating and implementing in our classrooms. Right. That's all from my side. Thank you very much for listening. I hope these stories help you see seating as part of pedagogy, not just classroom arrangements that you decide maybe one day before or just 5 minutes before the classroom. So it really had a huge impact on the probably outcome of your lessons. So I'm happy to take any questions. Let
Let me
me
start.